It started on an ordinary Tuesday in March, 11 months after Carol passed. The kind of day I never would have circled on a calendar if I'd known what it would set in motion. My son Danny, my only child, the boy I taught to ride a bike in the very driveway he'd later lock me out of, showed up on my porch with 2 suitcases, his wife Melissa beside him, and my grandkids Emma and Jake asleep in a car packed to the ceiling. He'd lost his job. Rent was due in 9 days. He didn't ask so much as stand there, waiting for me to say what he already knew I'd say. "Stay as long as you need," I told him. And I meant it, every word. The house had gone quiet after Carol died. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you talk to the coffee maker just to hear a voice that isn't your own. I'd taken to leaving the radio on in rooms I wasn't standing in, just so the place would sound lived in the way it used to. Having Danny's family, there felt like something had been given back to me. I cleared out the guest room that same night. I told Danny not to worry about rent. I told myself, more than once, that this was exactly what family was for. I'd built that house with my own 2 hands, more or less, not the framing, but the additions, the deck, the little shed out back where Carol kept her gardening things. 31 years of mortgage payments, paid off in full the spring before she got sick, a fact I remembered because we'd celebrated it with a bottle of wine on the porch, her joking that the bank finally owed us something for once. I'd never once thought of that house as anything other than the one thing in my life that was fully, unquestionably mine. The accountant had mentioned it that same spring, almost in passing, that with Carol gone, I might want to think about the deed, maybe add Danny's name, for simplicity down the line. I remember nodding along and doing nothing. It didn't feel like the right time to be thinking about paperwork. It felt like a betrayal of the moment, somehow, turning family into a legal document. So I let it sit. I told myself there'd be time. The first crack came so small I almost didn't feel it. 3 weeks after they moved in, I came downstairs for my coffee. Same mug, same chair by the window, same 7:15 routine I'd kept since before Danny was born, and found Melissa had rearranged the kitchen overnight. My mug wasn't in the cabinet where it had lived for 20 years. My chair had a laundry basket on it. "Oh, we just needed the space," she said, not quite looking at me, already turning back to the stove. "You don't mind, right?" I didn't mind. That's what I told myself, standing there in my socks on the cold kitchen tile. It was a small thing, a chair, a mug, a cabinet. It didn't seem worth mentioning, and mentioning it felt like making myself difficult in the one house where I'd never once had to ask permission for anything. So I found a new spot for my coffee mug, on a shelf I had to reach up for now. I found a new chair, one with a wobble in the leg I never fixed. And somewhere underneath, without any name for what I was doing, I started keeping count. 6 months in, it was the dinner table. Emma and Jake needed room for homework, Melissa said, so the table only sat 4 comfortably now. And would I mind just taking my plate to the counter? Just this once turned into every night by the second week. I stood at my own kitchen counter, eating alone with my back to the family I'd opened my home to, listening to them laugh at a table I'd bought the year Danny started high school. Danny never once suggested I pull up a chair from the den. I kept waiting for him to notice, to make room the way I would have for him at that age. He didn't. I told myself raising my voice over a chair would make me the difficult one, and a father wasn't supposed to keep score. Somewhere in the back of my mind, though, I was tallying it anyway. The chair, the mug, the cabinet, and now this. Small deposits into an account I hadn't decided yet whether I'd ever collect on. Danny never said anything unkind in those early months. That was almost the hardest part. He'd just go quiet when Melissa made her small adjustments, or he'd laugh it off. "You know how she gets, Dad." Like his silence was a kindness he was doing me, instead of a door quietly closing. I told myself he was tired. New job search, 2 kids, a marriage under strain. I told myself I could afford to be patient. I had, after all, raised him to believe that family absorbed things without keeping score. I just hadn't expected to be the only one still playing by that rule. By the following winter, the transmission went out on Danny's car, the one he needed for the new warehouse job, still on probationary hours, fragile enough that missing a week could cost him the position. $3,200, cash or card, the mechanic said. Danny didn't ask me directly. He never did. He simply mentioned things at dinner. The way you drop something you've already decided someone else will pick up. "I don't know what we're gonna do," he said that night, and I heard myself offering before I'd even finished chewing. I wrote the check that night, standing at the counter. Melissa hugged me, quick and warm, the kind of hug that closes a transaction rather than opens one. Danny said, "You're a lifesaver, Gramps," like the number wasn't real. In my head, without meaning to, I added it to the ledger, the 3,200, and underneath it, still uncollected, the mug, the chair, the dinners at the counter. I didn't say any of it out loud. I told myself that's not what a father does. A father gives. I believed that my whole life. Even as some small, cold part of me started keeping the number close, just in case. It kept adding up in small, quiet withdrawals after that. 600 for Jake's daycare deposit when their savings ran thin again. Groceries that somehow always ended up on my card just until payday. A property tax bill Danny suggested, gently, I might want to split, since, and he said this like it was obvious. We all live here, technically. I turned that word over for a long time afterward, alone in my own bedroom, wondering when my house had become a we that didn't seem to include me in any way that mattered, except when there was a bill attached to it. The third turn came at Emma's 10th birthday party, in my own backyard. Neighbors were there, folks I'd waved to for 15 years, balloons zip-tied to my fence, a rented bounce house crowding the garden Carol used to keep. Danny asked me, almost sheepishly, if I'd mind coming in through the side door during the party instead of the front, just so it doesn't get crowded by the entrance. I did it, ducking around the side of my own house on my granddaughter's birthday. I stood near the garage most of that afternoon, nursing a warm lemonade, watching my grandchildren blow out candles in my own yard. Then I heard it, a neighbor, Carol, and from 2 doors down, touching Melissa's arm and saying, warmly, "It's just so generous of you too, letting your father-in-law stay here with you." Melissa smiled. She didn't correct her. She glanced my way for half a second, like checking whether I'd heard, and said, easily, "We try to make it work." Something in me went very still and quiet, the way water goes still right before it boils. I ran the whole ledger again in my head. The mug, the chair, the counter dinners, the $3,200, the $600, the groceries, the property tax nobody ever split. And now this. A woman I'd known for 15 years believing I was a guest tolerated in a house I'd paid off myself, board by board, while the 2 people who actually lived there rent-free let the mistake stand. I didn't correct Melissa. I didn't correct Carolyn. I just went back inside, alone, and stood in my kitchen a long time before I remembered to smile for the cake. I told myself, even then, standing alone in that kitchen with cake frosting drying on a paper plate somewhere behind me, that it wasn't worth the fight. I told myself a lot of things that year, quietly, the way you tell yourself things you need to be true rather than things you know to be. I told myself family doesn't keep books, even as some part of me kept the books anyway, tidy and exact, in a place I never let anyone see. I told myself Danny still loved me underneath whatever this had become, and that love, real love, doesn't need a deed to prove it belongs somewhere. I believed that, mostly, through that whole long spring and summer, through a Thanksgiving where I ate, again, standing at the counter. I believed it right up until Christmas Eve. I'd gone out that afternoon to pick up a last few things. Wrapping paper, a bow for Jake's bike, a bottle of the cider Carol used to warm on the stove every December, because some habits you keep going even after the person they were for is gone. I was gone maybe 90 minutes. When I pulled the truck back into my own driveway, the porch light was already on, and through the front window I could see them. Emma and Jake tearing into presents on the living room floor, Melissa filming it on her phone, Danny crouched beside them laughing at something one of the kids had said. A whole Christmas Eve, already happening, warm and bright, and entirely underway, on the other side of a door I found, when I tried the handle, locked. I knocked, once, then again, the sound of it strange and small against the noise of Christmas carols playing somewhere inside. I heard Danny's footsteps come to the door, unhurried, and then his voice, close, on the other side of it, not opening it, not even reaching for the handle. "Dad," he said, and there was a long pause before the rest came, like he'd rehearsed it in his head and still couldn't quite get it out clean. "This family moved on without you. I think it's easier if you just give us tonight." I stood there for a second, not fully believing I'd heard it right, waiting for the door to open anyway, the way you wait for a punchline that never lands. It didn't open. His footsteps walked away from the door instead, back toward the light and the laughter, unhurried, like nothing at all had just happened on the other side of it. I stood alone on my own front porch in the cold, my breath fogging up against the glass, watching my grandchildren open presents through a window I'd installed myself. The summer after Danny left for college, back when I still thought the house I was building was something I'd be handing him one day, whole and warm, when I was good and ready to let it go. I didn't knock again. I didn't call out or bang on the glass the way some part of me wanted to. I stood very still for a moment, longer than I meant to, letting the cold settle into my coat, watching Jake hold up something Melissa had wrapped for him, watching Emma laugh at whatever Danny had just said. Then, quietly, without any drama in it at all, I turned around, walked back to my truck, climbed in, and sat there in the dark with the engine off, my hands on the wheel, breathing. I thought, clearly, calmly, for the first time in 3 years, about a folder in my file cabinet upstairs that I hadn't opened since Carol's funeral, and a deed inside it with exactly one name on it. Mine. I'd meant to add Danny's for simplicity, the way the accountant suggested, and I never had. And for 2 years I'd half considered that oversight a small failure on my part, one more thing I'd meant to get around to and hadn't. Sitting in that cold truck on Christmas Eve, looking back at my own lit-up windows from the outside for the first time in my life, that oversight didn't feel like a failure anymore. It felt like the only honest thing still standing on that entire property, the one fact in the whole arrangement that nobody had managed to rearrange, reassign, or quietly take for granted. I picked up my phone and dialed. Not a locksmith, not a friend, not Danny's cell phone, which I knew perfectly well he wouldn't answer anyway, not tonight. I called the county non-emergency line and asked, calmly, evenly, for an officer to meet me at my home. I gave them the address, the same address I'd given 100 times over the years for pizza deliveries and Christmas cards, and once, years ago, for an ambulance the night Carol first got sick. I told the dispatcher I'd been denied entry to a house that was solely and legally mine, that I had the deed sitting in the truck beside me to prove it, and that I simply wanted to come back inside my own home on Christmas Eve without anyone else's permission to do so. She took it all down without any particular urgency in her voice, the way you'd log any other quiet, solvable thing, and said someone would be by shortly. I sat in the truck and waited, engine still off, watching my breath cloud the windshield, and for the first time all evening, I felt something other than the cold. 12 minutes later, almost to the minute, 2 sets of headlights turned onto the street behind me, slow and deliberate, and pulled into the driveway I'd poured the concrete for myself back in 1994, the summer Danny learned to ride his bike on it. I watched in the mirror as the porch light caught the reflective stripe on the lead cruiser, and almost immediately, before either officer had even reached the walkway, I saw the curtains in the front window twitch, then still. By the time the officers were out of their cars, the front door had already swung open wide. Not for me, but because Danny, Melissa, and both kids had come rushing out onto the porch in their socks to see what on earth had pulled up outside their Christmas Eve, all 4 of them stopping cold at the sight of me standing there in the driveway with an officer beside me, calm, unbothered, holding nothing more threatening than a manila folder. Danny's face did something I hadn't seen on it in years, a kind of scramble, his mouth already moving to arrange an explanation before anyone had even asked him for one. "Officer, this is a misunderstanding. My dad just," he started, and the officer, polite but entirely unmoved, cut him off gently and asked simply whose name was on the deed to the property. I handed it over without a word. He looked it over under his flashlight, glanced up at Danny, then back down at the page, and said, evenly, in the flat, unbothered tone of a man who'd clearly had this exact conversation with other families on other holidays, that Mr. Ferris here did not have legal standing to bar the homeowner from entry to his own residence, and that if it happened again, it would be treated as exactly what it was. Melissa had gone very quiet on the porch, her phone, the same one she'd used to film the kids opening presents not 20 minutes earlier, hanging forgotten at her side, the screen still glowing faintly with the paused video. Emma, in her reindeer pajamas, bare feet on the cold porch boards, looked between her father and me with an expression I recognized instantly, because I'd worn it myself as a kid standing in some other doorway decades ago. The exact moment a child first understands that a grown-up they trusted can simply be wrong, and that the world doesn't stop to soften it for them. Jake just stood there holding a half-unwrapped toy, not understanding any of it yet, which was its own small mercy. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to, not with a folder in one hand and 31 years of paperwork behind it. I thanked the officer, walked past my son on my own front step without meeting his eyes, and went inside my own house on Christmas Eve to sit with my grandchildren by the tree for the last hour of the night, while Danny stood frozen in the doorway behind me, saying nothing at all, and Melissa quietly slipped her phone back into her pocket. Nobody apologized that night. I hadn't expected them to, not really, not with the officer's taillights barely out of the driveway. But something had shifted, plainly and permanently, in a way that didn't require anyone's permission to be real. I slept better that night than I had in months, oddly enough, in my own bed, in my own house, with the tree lights still glowing downstairs. 2 weeks into January, I sat Danny down at that same kitchen table, the one that apparently only sat for now, and told him, without anger, in the same even voice the officer had used on my porch, that the arrangement we'd been living under was over. I wasn't asking him to leave with nothing, and I made sure he understood that. I gave them until the 1st of April, offered to help with a deposit on a rental, same as I would have for any of the incidentals I'd covered without a second thought for 2 straight years. But the free rent ended that day. The blank checks ended. The property tax split, which had, of course, never actually been split in the first place, ended too, quietly, without a single line of new paperwork required, because there had never been anything to undo. For the first time since Carol died, I stopped being the invisible hand keeping everyone else's life afloat, while my own name got quietly erased from the one house that had ever fully belonged to me. They moved out that spring, into a small rental across town, closer to Melissa's mother than to me. It wasn't warm between us, not at first. Danny called twice a week out of what felt more like obligation than affection, careful, clipped conversations about the kids' schools and nothing much else, and Melissa mostly didn't call at all, which honestly cost me very little sleep. But Emma did call, more than anyone. She started asking her mother to drop her off on Saturday mornings, just to help me in the garden Carol used to keep. The tomato stakes finally pulled up and replaced with something new we picked out together at the nursery. Somewhere in those quiet, unhurried hours of pulling weeds side by side, not talking about anything in particular, I found I had something with her that I'd been missing for a long time without ever quite having a name for it. Jake came around slower, the way boys that age sometimes do, more interested in my old tools in the garage than in conversation, but he came around too, eventually, one weekend at a time. Danny, for his part, showed up one afternoon that summer, alone, no explanation given ahead of time, and stood in my driveway for a long while before he finally said he was sorry. Not for the money, which he barely mentioned at all, and not even really for the door itself, but for letting the door happen in the first place, for standing on the wrong side of his own silence for 2 straight years before that Christmas Eve ever came. I told him I appreciated it. I didn't tell him it changed much, not yet. Some things, I've found, you rebuild the same slow way you lose them, a Saturday at a time, not all at once with a single sentence in a driveway. I didn't need the apology to know I'd done right by myself. It was nice to have it anyway. This past Christmas Eve, I put the same string of lights up along the porch that Carol always liked, and I left the door unlocked, the way I always used to before any of this started. Emma helped me hang the wreath. Through my own front window, warm and lit from the inside for anyone passing by to see, my grandchildren were opening presents again, except this time, I was the one who let them in. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. And if you want more stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.